Psycho player threatens to burn other players' houses down over his favorite NPC. Hi everyone, All Things D&D is back with another story. Becoming so invested in a world a DM creates is a testament to a great DM. Becoming obsessively invested in a world a DM creates is problematic. This player goes off the rails pretty quickly, but there also may be another side to this story. Was the problem player pushed a bit too far, and the DM and players may not be as innocent as they claim? Let us know what you think after listening to this story about love, rage, and a player losing their cool over an NPC. I've been DMing for 5 to 6 years now and still going strong. In that time I've had ups and downs, highs and lows and all that jazz. I have many stories, both good and bad, yet in my opinion this is the story that makes me the angriest, because of how petty and how delusional the player was. No names will be mentioned for obvious reasons. We begin this tale when I was introduced to the player. One of my previous players was unable to play anymore, but still enjoyed talking about the game. He brought a friend along who seemed nice enough and listened to several of my D&D stories to get a good chuckle out of them. Turns out this friend of his was interested in D&D. He had never played D&D before and wanted to learn as much as possible. Eventually I liked the cut of his jib to the point that I invited him to a game. He made his character, a human fighter who dual-classed as a barbarian, and had a backstory about being a prince that was forced into exile because he was framed for his father's murder. Now he lives on the run, living in the wild and away from civilization until the events of the game. The game I had prepared was a one-shot that would help him get introduced to the mechanics of 5e. Joining us was the friend from earlier who managed to slip a day in to play the game, and one of my campaign's veteran players, who would mainly act as a buffer between the newbie and death. The group was tasked with venturing deep into a recently discovered tomb on the border of the Black Sands, a place eternally stained with dark magic and the all-powerful will of a Dark Lord. The first lich of this world who challenged both the gods and hell itself, and nearly tore the realm apart. This recently discovered tomb was supposed to be far enough from the sands to be deemed safe to enter. Of course, the tomb was booby-trapped, and soon they realized that the tomb was not meant to keep people out, but to keep the inhabitant, the left-hand lich of the Dark Lord, inside. After dealing with some puzzles, the party faces off against the lich, who casts a spell to wound the newbie. The newbie was extremely close to death, but managed to survive thanks to the efforts of the vet. I gave props to the newbie because he got really into character, feeling like he was extremely close to death. I had not realized it yet, but I had made a terrible mistake because of that. I tried to give the newbie a memorable moment, and possibly a personal villain to face when he got into the main game, but I had inadvertently caused myself a headache. Fast forward to a few weeks later, and I brought the newbie into the main game, which took place in the same world as the one-shot. He recognized the vet player, and the vet player brought him in and introduced him to the rest of the group. The party was somewhat large, and there was an NPC joining them, a princess character who the party was very familiar with at this point. She had previously snuck into the city to moonlight as a Zorro-like vigilante in order to help the people who were suffering at the hands of the brutal military dictatorship. The newbie and the NPC were around the same age, and I felt like introducing a little bit of drama, so I decided in character to have the NPC hang around him to see a potential romance that I could use for my own nefarious purposes later, to add more weight to the story. I offered the bait, and he took it hook, line, and sinker. Better than I expected, actually. She quickly became his favorite NPC, and his small budding romance began to build. I loved roleplay, and enjoyed little happy moments, especially before the storm, but this worked too well for my tastes. Over time, he began to obsess over the NPC, going everywhere she went, making sure she was safe, and trying to impress her. Unfortunately, the newbie did not take failed roles well. In my game, we have stories about both good and bad roles, incidents that we use as inside jokes to poke fun at the other party members. Unfortunately, he took these jokes personally. We explained to him several times that this was in no way meant to demean or insult him. Everyone has at least one moment where the dice failed them, and caused a story that we all laugh about. Yet the newbie grew upset after every incident. The biggest issue that disrupted the game a bit was when the party entered combat at one point. He proceeded to flashbang the area. Unfortunately, the party was fighting intellect devourers. They had no eyes, and thus I ruled that they could not be stunned by a flashbang. But the NPC was stunned and blinded. She rolled her hit at disadvantages. Both times she got nat 1s. Both times she hit the newbie since he was the closest to her. There wasn't any major damage, like 1 or 2 hit points as she accidentally stabbed him in his thighs. This was his moment that we would use to tease him. In a group where we had a guy who was called the barrel banger, and I who had one of my NPCs be constantly called the old man, despite being in his mid-30s, getting stabbed in the legs by your girlfriend like Ace Ventura was a better alternative. However, each time we brought this up, he saw it as a personal failure. Despite our urging that it was not the case, that's how the dice worked. He still saw the jokes as a personal attack and would fly into a long rant. We avoided mentioning the event again, but his behavior would get worse. I would later discover that his near death at the hands of the Lich would be a catalyst. He was so afraid of his character dying that he wanted to find means to avoid death. He found a homebrew class that was broken. The class was a type of fighter, but the kicker was that he would have these powers that would bring him back to life no problem. I take death seriously in my games. If someone dies and you don't find a scroll to resurrect them, or have a spell or anything in that nature, then you're effectively dead and gone. That said, I told him I would accept this class if he agreed that he would basically get just one extra life, and work for the god of death. He wanted to be immortal. He didn't want to die at all, which I wouldn't allow. But now we come to the big issue. The point of no return, where I could not tolerate his increasingly worse behavior. Aside from harassing a new player, the newbie continued having his usual complaining about his fear of death. But the final straw wasn't even in the game. We have a bot on Discord that I had modeled after the NPC, prior to the newbie's arrival. Some of my players were playing around with the bot. It had features like giving the bot 3 options of something it would prefer randomly. On a whim, they decided to say which among them that the NPC liked the most. The bot consistently chose everyone but the newbie, which enraged him. I don't mean that lightly. He was screaming bloody murder when we got in a voice chat with him, and he was flaming everyone on the chat, particularly targeting the new guy. As I mentioned before, he had some issues with the new guy the moment he joined in. Newbie continued to rage all through the evening. He posted some really disturbing comments, threatening to burn down the players' houses, especially the new player, who I remind you did nothing to deserve this other than the unforgivable sin of being new and messing with a bot. At this point I was asleep, and one of my players took it upon himself to screenshot every text and record every voice chat. When I woke up they showed me the evidence, and I was horrified. He threatened to kill not just the players, but burn down their houses with everyone inside, including family and pets, all over an NPC. I saw some chats he didn't manage to delete, and I had to put a stop to it right then and there. I could take the complaining about the fear of death. I could handle the obsession over an NPC. I could even deal with a few rage moments, but I will not tolerate death threats. I take them very seriously, and I will not allow my friends to be threatened in such a way. I banned him from Discord, muted him and all that. My other friend, the friend who introduced me to the newbie, was a close friend, and was sad that it came to this, but with the evidence he saw, he couldn't deny that newbie had gone too far. Newbie tried to make excuses that his account got hacked, that he somehow got drunk by putting sake on his sore tooth and other madness. It was only now that my friend told me that he had some underlying issues with rage, the type of person who will get an idea in his head and fully believe it. Last I heard, the newbie believed that I purposely intended to bully him out of the game, and that all the other players were my puppets and such. I had problem players before, but this guy took the cake. I can only hope he gets the help he deserves, and that his anger doesn't go beyond threats. Wow. Please don't threaten to commit a crime over D&D. And maybe don't bag on problem players who can't take a joke so often it gets to this point. What would you have done in this situation? Please let us know what you think and comment below. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel, All Things D&D. Our videos are posted every 5 days, so stay tuned for more amazing Dungeons & Dragons content.